From the realm of Necropia, a world designated for the deceased, where no signs of life exist, stands a large castle amid a barren landscape, seemingly defying time itself. This castle, the only one in Necropia, holds secrets unknown to all. Inside, it boasts numerous glistening gold pillars, exquisite decorative items, and captivating large paintings. The main hall, with its marble floors and sparkling statues intricately carved, along with symbols of absolute power, conveys an overwhelming sense of grandeur. The ruler of all this is the Death King Karnak, who reigns over Necropia. Karnak, transcending all, even has control over death itself. Yet, after a century, Karnak realizes that humans cannot fully master aspects like life or death. As a mortal, Karnak was a spoiled child from a declining noble family. Having lost his mother at a young age and enduring the heavy pressures of nobility, he became introverted, trusting only himself. This nurtured in him a fierce desire for power. Fate shifted when Karnak stumbled upon a forbidden book related to soul summoning. From that point, he abandoned his humanity to embark on a path of darkness. Before long, Karnak led his kingdom and all its people into oblivion. Even the fourth martial king and the grand sorceress, who had stood against him, could not escape becoming his subjects. The guardians of the world were successively defeated by him. When Karnak transformed the last guardian, the dragon king Grateria, into his subject, he used his flesh and blood to create his supreme descendant, Asura. This was the most powerful undead and the strongest death king ever to exist. Karnak thought he had everything under control, that he could enjoy everything. But it has been 70 years since he achieved ultimate power. Sitting on his golden throne, Karnak sighed lightly. His body, now just a dry skeleton, left him feeling empty. Karnak wondered how long this meaningless life would last. The warm sunlight, the cool breeze, the warmth of human touch, or even the sharp pain that pierces the skin, all seemed more valuable than his current monotonous despair. Nevertheless, Karnak still had hope. Amidst the castle, a colossal stone monument suddenly appeared, carrying the promise of a turbulent future. As footsteps echoed, one among the group approaching spoke up, acknowledging the master of all demise, the ruler of life and death, the conqueror of these lands. Barrows, the commander of the Death Legion, greeted Death King Karnak. Karnak informed Barrows that he was ready, and this time his intuition was very promising. Barrows was joyful as his master had finally succeeded. Karnak had spent time searching for ways to restore the pleasures of flesh. Along with Barrows, he experimented with blood-sucking and body possession, but the satisfaction was fleeting and failed to fill the deep void within Karnak. For supreme beings like him, this seemed impossible. However, Karnak still believed he could find a way to restore fulfillment. He thought that if he could not enjoy the sensations of a human, the only way was to reverse time, to return to when he was still human. Karnak declared that he and Barrows would go back to the moment when he first possessed dark mana. Barrows expressed concern, saying that if they failed, both could completely vanish. Karnak responded that if Barrows had any regrets about this life, he should speak up and Karnak would proceed without him. Hearing this, Barrows immediately denied any regrets, reaffirming his loyalty. They both placed their hands on the stone monument. Brilliant purple light emanated and spread throughout the area. With strong determination, Karnak and Barrows were intent on returning to their human days. Eventually, they succeeded. Barrows woke up first. He noticed that Karnak was still with eyes closed and gently woke his master. Karnak opened his eyes, saw the familiar face of Barrows, and felt that it had been a long time since he had experienced such a sensation. Barrows commented that Karnak's gaunt and haughty face hadn't changed from before. Karnak sensed that Barrows still lacked respect for him, but he wasn't particularly bothered. They had arrived at the correct place. Karnak looked at the book on the wooden table, the origin of it all. It was this book that had led him down the dark path of soul summoning. Without hesitation, Karnak flicked his hand and a purple magical flow from him reached the book and incinerated it. Karnak calmly explained to Barrows that he had memorized the entire content of the book and considered keeping such a forbidden book too dangerous. He believed that destroying it was the right choice. Barrows exclaimed about Karnak's elaborate planning when suddenly a growling noise emanated from Karnak's stomach. Barrows burst into laughter, remarking that Karnak looked more handsome than usual, and it had been a long time since Barrows had heard the sound of hunger. Together, Karnak and Barrows left the cave, setting out to find something to eat. The noise they made startled people on the street and interrupted the meals of those eating inside a nearby shop. In the shop, Karnak ate bread while Barrows enjoyed soup, both overwhelmed with emotion, tears streaming down their faces and loudly exclaiming the deliciousness of their food. Barrows even declared he could die for the taste of the bread, prompting Karnak to immediately object, reminding him of the reasons they had resurrected, wagering both their lives, and that this food was indeed worth it. Barrows cried so much his eyes swelled, obscuring his vision. Karnak's eyes were just as swollen, but he still reminded Barrows to chew properly. Karnak understood how Barrows felt, but advised moderation as money doesn't grow on trees. In response, Barrows also urged him to eat slowly. Just the smell of the food was enough to make Karnak melt with joy, and the scent from the next table, especially that of a plump, fragrant chicken, quickly captured Barrow's heart, but Karnak didn't have enough money to pay. He came from a once noble but now declined family. Karnak briefly harbored a murderous intent towards the other diners to take their food, but Barrows stopped him. With their current strength, Karnak and Barrows would be beaten to a pulp if they attempted such a thing. As Barrows opened his purse and lamented their poverty, he was surprised to find it unexpectedly full. He thought they were encountering a problem, as this journey of Karnak and Barrows seemed to have impacted everything around them. Karnak found the situation strange, and Barrows agreed something was definitely amiss. The purse, which was supposed to be nearly empty, was now brimming with coins, most of which were silver. Karnak couldn't understand what had gone wrong. At that time, the financial situation of the Jester family was extremely precarious. Karnak's grandfather, Baron Grelid, had tried to revive the family by investing and mortgaging their lands, but all of his efforts failed, leaving a massive debt for Karnak's father, Baron Kraput. Unfortunately, Karnak's father lacked the capacity to manage the ever-growing debt. The two sons from his second wife, who were useless, brought no value to the family. Karnak, a spoiled child born into a declining family, endured contempt and mistreatment from his own relatives. Those days were nearly unbearable. That was the true state of Karnak's family, not this abundance of silver. It wasn't a joyful situation. Karnak worried that the time regression had gone wrong. Barrows was also unsure about this, despite being just a swordsman. Karnak feared that they hadn't actually returned to the past, but many details in his memory seemed very similar. Suddenly, Barrows thought of using the unexpected wealth to buy the chicken. The enticing aroma of the chicken nearly drove Barrows mad, immediately drawing Karnak's attention. Barrows added that if they didn't use the money, their worries wouldn't disappear. The delicious chicken became the king of their hearts. They decided to indulge in the meal to dispel all anxieties. Barrows wanted to order one, but Karnak immediately said that each should have their own. Thus, 2 chickens were ordered. By evening, after a satisfying meal, Karnak and Barrows rode back on horseback. Barrows was almost fainting from fullness. On their return, both Karnak and Barrows passed out and slept deeply. Barrows' facial expression changed significantly, showing discomfort when he thought of the people from the family. Barrows felt bothered about meeting them again. Karnak reassured Barrows, saying that flattering those people would be fine as he was no longer the same as before. However, the issue was why things were so strange. Barrows agreed with Karnak, noting that not only 1 or 2 things were strange, but even the horses they were riding were odd. The stable manager suddenly flattering Karnak and Barrows made them feel uneasy. It was implausible for a declined family to have such good horses, and the villagers, who previously despised them, calling them a wretch and his companion, were now overjoyed to see them again, even tearing up. Barrows thought this must surely be a nightmare, while Karnak felt uneasy. Barrows said that when they arrived, they would find out the answers. As the two rode their horses slowly toward the large building, it had been a long time since Karnak had returned here, while Barrows had no fond memories of the place, yet he felt a touch of nostalgia. Barrows had been an orphan, his life far from joyful. His parents, con artists, had abandoned him in the dead of night. It was Karnak who found Barrows as he was fading away. Karnak then brought Barrows home, and surprisingly, his father agreed to take him into the family. Although Karnak was a bastard child, the family still needed to maintain appearances, and Karnak needed an attendant. Lost in thoughts about the past, Karnak was startled when Barrows repeatedly called his name and pointed in a direction. Barrows thought they had arrived at the Jester family mansion, thinking they were at the wrong place, but Karnak confirmed it was the place from his memory. Before them stood a tall wall, a 2-story mansion with a terrace and a vast garden surrounding everything, just as in Karnak's memory, only the mansion was much more lavish than he remembered. It seemed the mansion had been rebuilt. Karnak wondered where the family had found the money to renovate it. As Karnak approached, a gatekeeper greeted him, but another quickly corrected him that he had greeted incorrectly. Both gatekeepers bowed deeply with respect, addressing Karnak as the head of the family. This left Karnak and Barrows too shocked to speak. As Karnak and Barrows entered the castle, the butler, Japelpleed, welcomed them. As he poured tea, he informed them that Karnak had been the head of the family for half a year. The butler also inquired about the goal Karnak hoped to achieve, which was apparently the reason for Karnak's journey. Karnak, not understanding the goal the butler referred to, casually responded that it was fine. The butler, pleased, mentioned that the former head of the family and Lady Isabella would be very happy to hear this. This added to Karnak's and Barrows' confusion, as both Karnak's father and stepmother were dead. Noting no change in the mood of the head of the family, the butler continued, informing that Karnak's 2 half-brothers had also passed away. Karnak realized that this was why he had been elevated to head of the family. He clenched his fists, unable to understand why his entire family had died, and the purpose of the trip now became clear. Karnak had to master the art of soul summoning without anyone noticing. Leaning close to Karnak, Barrows whispered, questioning how Karnak could reveal their true purpose. Karnak responded that was precisely why he had fabricated the story about their trip and why he needed to learn soul summoning while everything appeared stable. Noticing their silence, the butler approached with concern. Karnak feigned weakness, supported by Barrow's corroborating act. Karnak claimed he was very tired after the long journey and would continue the conversation the next day. The butler immediately apologized for not being attentive and offered to escort Karnak to his room. As they walked down the hallway to the room, Karnak and Barrows shared a triumphant slap of the hands for their successful performance. Barrows was worried. They had temporarily evaded suspicion, but he couldn't grasp the implications of the butler's words. Karnak explained that in such a situation, there was only one option. They had to leave quickly while everyone else was asleep. As night fell, the butler was sound asleep on a comfortable bed, while Karnak and Barrows stood beside the bed, their gazes fixed on the sleeping butler. Barrows took out the herbs he had prepared earlier, a collection that had taken him considerable effort to find. Karnak picked up a bowl and began to probe the butler's mind. A magical flame emanated from the bowl of herbs, slowly entering the butler's body as if calling him to awaken. The butler's eyes rolled back and he gradually sat up, his body enveloped in blue magic. Karnak commanded the butler to explain everything about how the Jester family improved their finances and why Karnak became the head of the family. The butler, following the order, began to recount the entire story. 4 years earlier, the second young master had discovered a large copper mine while training. Karnak was startled, having thought that copper mines were just a pretext for nobles to hide wealth. Barrows agreed, but also considered it a rare case. Karnak then inquired about the cause of the family's demise within just 4 years. The butler continued, saying the main problem was this copper mine, located centrally between the Jester and Devender families, who continually fought over its ownership, leading to a devastating war. The Devender family had a well-trained army, and no one had yet defeated Sir Randolph, a distinguished warrior of the family. In one battle, Randolph easily killed Baron Croput and even defeated Lord Tessel, the eldest son and the family's finest knight. The second young master, Farelth, was severely injured, losing both legs to Randolph. Overcome with pain, Farelth took his own life, and the Baroness, shocked, also died soon after. Eventually, young Master Karnak was chosen as the heir to the family. The two families had agreed to cease fighting until Karnak came of age and officially became the head of the family. However, there were concerns about the copper mine and the compensation promised for the war, and at that moment, young Master Karnak proposed an idea that saved the family. Standing on a high platform with people cheering below, he suggested a duel with Lord Deventer under the auspices of the goddess Allium, the goddess of the moon and justice. Hearing about the duel, Karnak and Barrows were so shocked that they had to interrupt the butler's story. Karnak and Barrows could hardly believe the nature of this duel, but the butler continued to explain that it would be a one-on-one fight, a battle between two individuals under the mandate of the goddess Allium. The first to replace a warrior in their place would have the duel witnessed by a priest of Allium, and the victor would decide the fate of the other. Barrows felt bewildered and could not grasp the situation, questioning whether Karnak's participation in this duel would essentially be digging his own grave. Karnak covered his face, incredulous, and began to understand why the people had shown him so much affection earlier that day. Karnak thought he would lose the duel but chose this path instead of continuing the war. The Devender family could not refuse the duel without damaging their own reputation. If Karnak won and secured the copper mine, he and Barrows might not starve. Barrows was worried because of Karnak's current skill level. Victory seemed unlikely, so Karnak had to try his utmost. Karnak asked the butler when the duel would take place and learned it was scheduled for a month from now, which worried them both due to the short preparation time. The next morning, Barrows was startled to find a table laden with delicious, beautifully arranged food. Karnak had prepared these dishes for Barrows, knowing how hard he always worked. Barrows was touched, nearly brought to tears, and loudly thanked Karnak. Sitting at the table, Barrows enjoyed the meal heartily, but did not forget to ask Karnak about taking such a rest while the duel was approaching. Karnak cunningly replied that he wanted Barrows to fight in his stead as the rules allowed it. Immediately, Barrows turned away and waved off the suggestion, saying that the meal Karnak prepared was merely a bribe, and apology or not, Barrows would not accept it. Karnak grabbed Barrows by the shoulders, shook him, and persuaded him that since Barrows had already killed 3 out of 4 martial kings, the odds were better. Barrows pondered, admitting that it was all thanks to soul summoning techniques, and although it sounded simple, experience alone was not enough to attain martial prowess. Barrows said that with half a year of training he might manage, but a month was far too short. Hearing this, Karnak snatched the food from the table, no longer allowing Barrows to eat. Barrows continued, suggesting that if Karnak could find a sufficiently talented individual among the knights, then Karnak would need to rely on him. Barrows emphasized that Karnak had only one option left, to resort to the art of soul summoning, now understanding why Karnak decided to learn it. However, soul summoning was forbidden, and Karnak recalled the days when he and Barrows were fugitives. They had once obliterated an entire family using soul summoning, but an Allium priest discovered Karnak was the perpetrator. They were certain Karnak was a soul summoner, and when they were surrounded, Karnak had to use the technique to break out and escape. Karnak wondered why those people knew he could perform soul summoning, as the book said no one would know. Barrows, while fleeing, read from the book and explained that only ordinary people, magicians, and knights were unaware, but priests were the exception. Returning to the present, Barrows chuckled, reminiscing about those challenging times while Karnak justified it as merely the beginning of a legend. Karnak and Barrows realized that the butler's mention was a covert plan to use soul summoning and pretend it was a regular fight. However, since the duel's judges would be priests, using soul summoning could repeat history. Barrows suggested that they just gather some money and flee, but Karnak felt it would be a pity since the people he despised were gone, and those remaining were fond of him. Barrows was exasperated to see Karnak pretending to be a benevolent lord and said if Karnak wished so, he would prepare for his funeral. Suddenly, Karnak called Barrows back and mentioned that he had a new idea. The scene shifted to the northern fortress of Deventer, where the soldiers were practicing. Wright approached Randolph and asked about his preparations for the duel with Karnak. However, Randolph was arrogant and belittled Karnak, considering him just a young lord without skills. Although Bright didn't think Randolph would lose, he was still concerned because Karnak must have some plan by requesting this duel. Barrows, sitting out of the fray, observed and assessed Randolph. He noted that Randolph wasn't strong in combat, so his opponent still had a chance to win. Indeed, Randolph was a fool for relying on brute force, making him predictable. But for Barrows, such an opponent was an advantage. Indeed, a month was not enough, and while Barrows was pondering, he was suddenly spotted by a girl who noticed him constantly watching Randolph. It turned out she was Randolph's sister, and she suspected Barrows posed a threat to her brother. Barrows explained that he admired the strength of the strongest knight of the North. Quickly, he introduced her to some beautiful handkerchiefs, hoping she wouldn't recognize him. Back at Jester Estate's training grounds, Barrows cheerfully returned only to find the young master sprawled on the ground. Panicked, he vigorously shook him awake. Once fully conscious, Barrows asked if Karnak had run around the training ground 50 times. The young master confirmed, saying that was the reason he had fainted. However, Barrows commented on how weak Karnak's endurance was. Karnak asked for a rest, but Barrows refused, switching to a ruthless mode, his face turning cruel as he approached the young master. This was just the warm-up. The real training was about to begin. Barrows decided to schedule a rigorous training regimen for the young master leading up to the upcoming duel. With only 20 days left until the duel, Karnak had to eat a hearty breakfast each morning, starting today with meat, then move to the training grounds for 100 push-ups, 100 club swings, and 100 squats, followed by a rest. As time passed, with only 15 days left to the duel, the repetitive grueling sessions continued and Karnak was utterly exhausted, turning almost stone-like. Despite the hardships, Barrows noted some progress in Karnak, although he was still far behind compared to Randolph. Next, Barrows started sword training for him. However, after observing a few of Karnak's sword strokes, Barrows critiqued them as chaotic. Karnak's hands trembled, his gaze was unfocused, his shoulders were rigid, and his posture was awkward. Numerous mistakes and flaws were evident, failing to satisfy the demanding trainer. After many repetitions, Karnak finally began to stabilize. Barrows decided to attack him with swift sword strikes, leaving Karnak unable to counter effectively. Barrows' speed and decisiveness made it very difficult for Karnak to find an opportunity to retaliate. The only thing Karnak could try to maintain was his stance, but eventually he couldn't hold it and was knocked down by Barrows. Helping Karnak up, Barrows explained the essence of knighthood, emphasizing the importance of maintaining posture even while dodging. Only in this way could he remain stable enough to avoid continuous strikes. However, Karnak confessed he couldn't dodge continuous attacks. Barrows knew this, but the strategy was to show Randolph Karnak's fighting spirit, demonstrating that even if outmatched, he would not easily yield. Randolph's penchant for showmanship often led him to flaunt his skills before an audience and toy with his opponents. However, a situation where his opponent refuses to engage poses a different challenge. A prolonged fight would damage his reputation, prompting Randolph to seek a quick end to the duel. Therefore, Barrows wanted Karnak to show an indomitable spirit, and the way to achieve that was through rigorous training. With only 5 days until the duel, Karnak's determination grew stronger. Yet during joint training sessions, he still could not defend himself adequately and repeatedly fell to the ground. This filled Barrows with frustration and dissatisfaction. 4 days left, Karnak fell again. 3 days, the same outcome. 2 days, no change. Despite these setbacks, Barrows wasn't satisfied with the current situation, worrying that Karnak might not even make it to the duel. Barrows decided to teach Karnak the swordsmanship of the 4 martial kings in the final part of their training. Karnak was surprised that Barrows knew them all. Barrows explained that they were all under his command at some point, except for the martial techniques of Rapisel because she had refused to serve any longer as a knight. In defiance, she had been split into 3 by Barrows, becoming a gatekeeper. Barrows chose to teach Karnak the Delphia technique of martial king Levin. Karnak wondered if 2 days were enough to learn the skills of a martial general. Confidently, Barrows declared that 1 day would suffice. Finally, the day of the duel arrived. At the border between Deventer and Jester, people from all around gathered, eagerly anticipating the match. The crowd buzzed with speculation about who would win. On one side, Karnak was now ready. An elderly man with distinguished gray hair demands order from everyone. Standing there, he claims to act under the authority of the god Allium and decides that both clans have the right to own the copper mine under the condition of participating in a match. He sings praises of Karnak from the Jester clan and Randolph from Deventer. After receiving a solemn oath from both in the name of the god, he prays briefly and loudly announces the start of the match. On the fervent stands, Randolph provocatively taunts Karnak. With a powerful swing, Karnak clenches his teeth to withstand the intense light, smirking and taunting back. Randolph compliments that Karnak is not foolish. Below the grandstands, the crowd praises Karnak, who, while dodging Randolph's swift and dangerous blows, thinks it's time to unleash his power. Karnak shouts a challenging cry. Randolph coldly laughs, seeing Karnak as unskilled yet full of fighting spirit. Randolph's face darkens, his sword raised with lethal intent. Karnak feels the incredible energy of the sword, hesitating slightly. Thinking his shield would shatter before Randolph's descending blade, Karnak rolls away screaming in terror. Randolph, surprised, wonders what skill Karnak used. The audience is also puzzled by Karnak's evasive roll, admiring his agility and thinking such a skill wouldn't be banned. Struggling to stand, Karnak mocks that Randolph is not so formidable, as he didn't even need to use his shield. After mocking Randolph as slow as a pig but still aspiring to be a knight, Randolph glares at Karnak, angry at being underestimated. Holding his sword ready, Karnak dares Randolph to try. Randolph is momentarily stunned by Karnak's sword skill. The surrounding people admire that the Lord has mastered the martial king's ultimate technique. Frowning, Randolph sneers as he was nearly fooled by that technique. He thinks a calm response will prevent further issues. Looking down on Karnak, Randolph believes the martial king's technique is only for the gifted, and Karnak is surely not up to the mark. Seeing Karnak, Randolph feels assured of his victory. Pointing his sword at Karnak, Randolph vows to reclaim his honor under the name of the goddess Allium. Despite appearing bold, Karnak feels utterly terrified inside. He senses that menacing look and believes he will be defeated right now. Reflecting on a previous conversation where Burroughs, the guardian of Karnak, advised him to emulate the martial king's skills, Karnak feels the certainty of those words and the real plan they needed to execute. As he blocks and strikes at the swords thrust by Randolph on the stands, Karnak cannot help feeling miserable, as Burroughs had not prepared him for such a brutal beating. Thinking about what he needs to do, Karnak counters aggressively. Tears like flowing internally, his face as deflated as a spoiled pastry. He yells out that Randolph's efforts are futile. It would be brave of Randolph to think that's all it would take to defeat him. Randolph frowns, confused by what Karnak is saying while being pounded by him. The battle on the fortress makes the citizens look at Karnak differently, as if they respect him more now. Previously, they always saw him as a crude and peculiar person, but now comforting cheers and encouragement for Karnak echo from the stands with tears streaming down. Burroughs, his face fierce with murderous intent, observes the battle unfold positively as Karnak dodges every direct hit, pleasing Burroughs as he waits for a deserving outcome. Randolph steps back, too annoyed to let Karnak continue beating him. Randolph says, looking at Karnak as if he's about to take his last breath, yet still loudly taunting him. Randolph shouts, charging towards Karnak to prepare the final blow. Burroughs grins fiercely, as if he had been waiting for this moment, and yells at Karnak to get ready. Karnak, sweating, remembers Burroughs' instructions, realizing that if he doesn't land the final blow correctly, he will be exposed. Spotting a vulnerable point at Randolph's feet, Karnak pulls back into a defensive stance and unexpectedly drives his sword into the ground. The earth flies up in a cloud of dust. Randolph stiffens, surprised that a trainee like Karnak could block that blow. Karnak swings his sword in a diagonal arc and quickly twists his wrist to deliver the final blow. Randolph barely manages a scream before being thrown out. Panting heavily, Karnak surveys the situation, his face ashen as everything worsens. Karnak stands up taunting that if that's all his fighting is, it's really poor. Despite a wound across his chest, Randolph still stands proudly with his sword, scornful as he believes even a cat scratch is better than Karnak's attack on him. Randolph scoffs at the insignificance, laughing loudly and provocatively, saying Karnak is just that, even a cat scratch is better than him. From the start of the match, everything seemed under control, but the current situation was completely unexpected and appeared devoid of any miracles, being truly cruel and unfair. Randolph, resting his hand on his sword, taunts that he has lost his guard, saying it seems he's just amusement for his teammates. Karnak responds that he has risked everything and yet Randolph doesn't care, which isn't too bad. Either way, he feels no remorse for those who follow. Karnak's expression and smile then change, becoming sinister. Randolph, startled by this shift, doesn't understand why Karnak is displaying such a look and wonders what the smug expression means. From Randolph's chest wound, a stream of black, toxic energy emerges. Confused, he frantically slashes at it with his sword. Seizing this opportunity, Karnak charges with determination not to lose. Randolph looks down at his feet as the dark streams envelop him, and as Karnak charges, Randolph kicks him away with force. Spectators around them question the nature of this power, wondering if Randolph is controlling some dark force and what kind of battle energy it is. Taking advantage of the current atmosphere, Barrows points at Randolph and bluntly declares to everyone that it is a soul summoning technique, the power of demons. The elderly official overseeing the match refuses to accept this and immediately sends soldiers to handle Randolph. Then he and the soldiers jump down to stop the action under the name of Altium, demanding Randolph to drop his sword and surrender for justice against his filthy existence. Confused, Randolph asks what they are talking about and wonders what Karnak has done to him. Seeing Randolph confused, Karnak is pleased, as this was his intention. Randolph struggles, his face contorted as his body is enveloped by the dark energy, seemingly controlled by a curse and perhaps also because he lacks the skill to manage it. With no other choice, the organizers decide to act immediately at the opportunity. A volley of spears is hurled at Randolph, who, unaware, screams in pain. He then spits out blood and collapses on the arena floor. The soldiers check and find him breathless, deciding to send a notification to the domain of the Count to investigate. After the incident, the elderly referee announced that justice had been served, declaring that the warrior from Deventer had used dark magic in this sacred battle, which amounted to a disregard for the dignity of the goddess. Therefore, the warrior from Jester, Baron Karnak, was declared the winner. In the domain of Deventer, the news of this defeat was still shocking. Some claimed to have found evidence, a cloak with the symbol of a soul summoner at their location, and such evidence was found throughout the domain. Randolph's sister, bewildered, exclaimed in denial, insisting it couldn't be true, as they had bought all these items from a merchant. Others, while searching, found a mysterious potion and asked Randolph's sister for an explanation. When she saw the potion, she froze, her face paled, and claimed it was merely a hair growth potion because someone had always been worried about losing hair. However, those inspecting affirmed that it was indeed evidence of a soul summoner. A trial would soon be organized. A few days later, in the domain of Jester, Karnak was reveling in his victory with a feast on the table. He chatted with Barrows, asking how he felt about this celebration just for the champion, quite different from the food he had during training. Barrows, joyfully gnawing on a chicken leg, enjoyed the moment as Karnak did not rest, eating and talking with Barrows. Suddenly, Barrows asked him why he had thought of using that type of magic. Karnak calmly responded that he had to do everything to win, and it only succeeded due to Randolph's temper. A month before, he had discussed with Barrows about using the soul summoning magic in a different way. Since using soul summoning magic in life was similar to using it in a battle, it would be better to use it, but make it seem like Randolph, the opponent, was the one using it during their fight. He would have to act quickly, and his main expertise was merely playing the fool. By taking advantage of the referee being distant, he could easily deceive them, as it would be hard to tell who was using magic during their fight. It was advanced and strong soul magic, so no one would suspect him as the instigator. Even they wouldn't guess that he had the capability to do so. However, there was one more issue. If Karnak wanted to implement his plan, he had to make his opponent bleed, but with his current skills, he wasn't sure if his sword could even touch him. Returning to the present at the Jesselin Cathedral of the Altium Church, the senior officials asked the elderly referee of the match if the investigation into Deventer's use of dark magic was completed, as this was a significant issue and only certain facts should be reported. The referee reported that from his experience and the investigation, he could confirm the use because this wasn't just any ordinary soul summoner's doing. The perpetrator had dared to use a transcendent shard, something the goddess had warned them about, perfectly fitting as it was the dark apocalypse. Back at Karnak's side, after eating and drinking his fill, he cheerfully picked his teeth, remarking that luck seemed to be on their side. Barrows happily celebrated with him, saying the world was supporting them and their job now was just to enjoy. Karnak mused that this second life was indeed colorful. But Barrows reminded him that with the Deventer clan falling apart, other powers would want to take them down. Karnak knew this and mentioned that this was why he needed to enhance his soul summoning skills. Moreover, he needed to find a way to use soul summoning magic without being detected. 3 months later, Karnak was still sitting in his mansion practicing his magic, constantly muttering that he must focus because the negative energy from the dark moonlight of the deep night would bring destructive power. He had to filter it out, purifying the remaining energy to create pure power. Eventually, he mastered it and created a perfect concoction, which was the chaotic magic. It has been 3 months since Barrows began training with the warriors to become an official knight of Jester, as there was no other way. However, the problem was that the warriors' capabilities were terribly inadequate. At the moment, Barrows was sparring with Guilliman, who, after a short while, paused the fight, gasping for breath. Barrows, with a polite smile, thanked Guilliman for taking the time to spar with him. Unlike Barrows' relaxed smile, Guilliman, sweating and visibly tired, responded that it was no problem, as he had learned a lot from Barrows, and that Barrows had progressed too quickly, predicting that he would soon become the strongest knight in Jester. Guilliman had invited Barrows to go drinking with the other warriors that day. However, Barrows, who had important duties assigned by Karnak, couldn't join them. At home, Barrows was cheerfully announcing to Karnak that it was snack time, but as he entered the door, he was nearly consumed by a sudden burst of fire, narrowly escaping serious harm. Shocked, Karnak scolded Barrows, warning him of the dangers of entering without knocking. Still reeling from the near miss, Barrows asked Karnak what skill he had used, noting that it was unlike any soul-summoning technique. Karnak praised Barrows' sharpness, explaining that the skill was indeed different, more aligned with dark magic. At that moment, red lights surrounded Karnak, who explained that there are 4 ways to transcend humanity in this world: as an aura knight, a magic wizard, a holy cleric, and through soul summoning, which harnesses dark and destructive powers. This supernatural strength accumulates energy suitable to one's body and soul, and once sufficiently accumulated, it becomes a power optimized for the soul and body. Once your soul is granted such power, you cannot possess another. Currently, Karnak had no desire to change his power, but was developing it into its second phase. He described the soul's summoning technique as using death energy and pressure, a sort of dirty power, which suited him well due to his past in a harsh environment, similar to how certain foods are made in unsanitary ways, like fermented cheese. This power has also been refined to eliminate any sense of filth or disgust, and now Karnak is pushing away negative emotions like hatred and anger, leaving only the pure abilities of darkness and death, which he has transformed into magical power. Karnak excitedly explained that he had named it chaotic magic. He then showed Barrows the red aura, noting that it didn't look like normal magical power, so he was considering masquerading as a wizard. At this point, Barrows expressed concern about whether he could replicate the power he had previously with chaotic magic. Karnak grimaced and waved his finger, denying that being stronger would only lead to more problems, and now he only needed to be strong enough to protect their territory. In the western forests of Jester, the soldiers had been dealing with a series of monsters at the mine which had all been defeated. As the soldiers were gathering to retreat and report, a monster suddenly attacked from behind and almost crushed Captain Gilliman. Barrows appeared just in time to strike the monster with his sword, humbly stating that he had arrived a bit late and asking if Gilliman was all right. Gilliman immediately thanked him, feeling the energy of an official knight activating. Barrows smiled and mentioned that he had only just become a knight and was still quite clumsy and embarrassed. Then he inquired about the state of the female monsters recently, noting they seemed strange. Gilliman replied that the snarls had become at least twice as strong, so he believed the rumors might be true. Barrows pondered the rumors, suggesting Gilliman meant divine manipulation. The prophecy of the god of destruction stated that the 7 gods who protect the world and humanity had issued a decree. The void would open and unleash a trial that was not to be allowed. It would be a darkness that erases light, a shadow threatening the lives of all beings. At that time, the trials would arise, monsters would absorb unstable power, and death itself would awaken and step onto this continent. The Death King would appear, and these 8 worlds would be marked by blood and tears, and he would be the harbinger of destruction. Following the prophecy, monsters on the neighboring continent became ferocious. Necromancers lost control, causing chaos everywhere. The Church of the Continent announced the prophecy to prevent chaos and began fighting back under the blessings of the god protecting this world. Barrows returned and reported everything to Karnak, wondering why the past had changed, as there had been no such prophecy before his reincarnation. Karnak was frustrated because they still lacked enough information. Barrows suspected that the rumors were definitely about them and asked Karnak if this had anything to do with him. Karnak sighed and said that the timeline didn't match since the prophecy was far from the time they had reincarnated. Barrows, scratching his pale face in confusion, asked if this was why Randolph's case had been easily dismissed, and he began to worry about the apocalypse because they had gone through so much to reincarnate. Karnak thought that those living in the countryside might be able to do something, but regarding world destruction, he had tried it and knew better than anyone else. He reassured Barrows to trust in the power of this world and to just stay in their territory and enjoy life. 7 days later, a young man suddenly appeared, introducing himself as from the Temple of the Sun, following the orders of Lachiel to propose a collaboration. Karnak and Barrows were stunned, thinking they were doomed. The young man continued, explaining that they had discovered a spirit summoner operating in the city of Derwarth who had fled to Jester. They believed he was hiding in a nearby forest and wanted someone familiar with the area to guide them. Barrows frowned at Karnak, wondering silently if he felt anything. They had to refuse him naturally, making use of Karnak's acting skills. However, Karnak didn't follow the script. He confidently laughed and said it was impossible to match anything involving gods, which puzzled Barrows, who was standing beside him. Expecting Karnak to understand, he was surprised by Karnak's actions. Not only did he not refuse, but he even promised to provide someone to guide them. After the man left, Barrows grimaced and questioned whether Karnak had thought he didn't want to intervene in continental matters. Karnak calmly sipped his tea and stated this would be an opportunity to grasp the situation, as they would capture and torture the man, showing him what real power was, all the while displaying his demonic demeanor. On the other hand, the fleeing spirit summoner was running desperately, wondering if his pursuers had lost his trail yet, thinking they had exposed him like dirt. He had thought he would no longer have to live like a beggar, but they had started chasing him. He was determined to survive and seek revenge. The soldiers had timely pursued him to capture him. At that moment, he realized he had been trapped from the start. He had no way out. Pushed to a corner, his demeanor changed. His eyes turned a fierce red as he gritted his teeth and summoned the undead. The soldiers, seeing this, told each other to take out their protective charms to avoid being hit. Meanwhile, sitting on an ancient tree, Karnak and Barrows were comfortably positioned to watch the drama unfold. However, Karnak complained that the scenery was beautiful but the swordsmanship and magic of the necromancer were all wrong. Barrows, feeling disheartened, noted that it was obvious since the man hadn't received proper training. He thought they should intervene soon. Pointing downward, he noted that the man had started running again. And before the soldiers could catch him, the two of them needed to move quickly. In the damp, dark cave, a man struggles, his face shifting colors as he moves along, lamenting his powerful urge to flee. Fortunately, the cave is warm enough for him to start a fire for warmth. Startled by the crackling of the fire, he realizes that Karnak and Barrows had already been sitting there. Barrows sits comfortably by the fire, warming his hands, and is pleased to see him arrive, thinking they would meet later. Karnak smirks, indicating that this place is a familiar refuge for them. Frightened, the man's face tightens as he asks who they are. Karnak and Barrows stand up. Karnak reveals that someone outside is waiting to capture him. In a fit of rage, feeling trapped, he shouts for his minions, and shadows surrounded by purple light envelop Karnak and Barrows. As he runs away, he thinks this will distract Karnak and Barrows long enough for him to escape. Barrows, seeing the multitude of shadows, asks Karnak what they should do since his sword can't cut through souls. Karnak confidently tells him to stand still because he is about to try a new technique. The man, a demonic necromancer, thought he could escape far, but just as he exits the cave, he screams in disbelief as the cave explodes into fragments. Karnak and Barrows emerge unscathed, cheerfully asking him where he thought he was going. Karnak sternly commands the rocks to freeze and explode, and thousands of flaming rocks fall to the ground like traps. The necromancer, caught off guard, clenches his teeth, realizing Karnak is a more powerful wizard than he anticipated, and he does not want to fall into enemy hands. Suddenly, the necromancer summons a tall god of death above him, deciding to fight Karnak and Barrows to the death, commanding the malevolent soul to advance and let them feel the embrace of death. Barrows strokes his chin, noting the youthful energy, while Karnak wonders why the necromancer refers to the creature before him as a malevolent soul when it is just a ghost. Frowning, he shouts a denial when he hears the necromancer claim that they are afraid. The demonic necromancer declares that it's too late for them to beg for their lives, extending his hand forward to push the demon ahead. Suddenly, Karnak's expression darkens, his eyes deepen in shade, and he utters a clear and distinct command for the demon to kneel. Inexplicably, in an instant, the large shadow before Karnak loses all its momentum and kneels trembling at his feet. The scene shifts to the necromancer's face, which grows even more terrified upon realizing that Karnak is also a soul summoner. Standing with one foot on the subdued ghost, Karnak comments that it is too late for the necromancer to realize this. Karnak speculates that the necromancer might not even know where he is. Karnak then emits a dangerous blue light like a giant hand grabbing the necromancer. Lazily opening his mouth, he talks about his nature while the necromancer screams in agony. The necromancer lies flattened on the ground, surrounded by gentle blue lights. Karnak commands him to rise, and the necromancer obediently stands up like a docile creature. Karnak inquires how he came by his soul's summoning power. The necromancer meekly responds that it was merely luck. He would have been sorrowing in the streets as usual, but a black light in an alley engulfed him, flowing through his veins, and he rejoiced upon realizing it was an apocalyptic power, coveted by many. Delighted to wield such tremendous power, he didn't hesitate to use it on the innocent and retreated into a mansion. Karnak flicks his ear, seemingly bored by the story, and tells him to stop when he realizes the necromancer is just a nobody. Barrows asks Karnak if he plans to control the necromancer's mind now that he has a knife. Karnak says it's time to clean up. With a swish, blood splatters onto the golden floor. Barrows is surprised to see Karnak absorbing the necromancer's power, thinking Karnak despises anything dirty. Karnak mentions that he needs to understand more about this power, but then hesitates. Barrows, concerned, asks if Karnak is alright. With people approaching, Karnak finds the situation strange. Several days later, in a large room, Barrows scratches his head, surprised that the matter has become serious enough to warrant soundproof barriers. Karnak asserts that the situation is not normal and explains that he examined the power the previous day, indicating that it was indeed caused by the necromancer. Barrows, confused and gaping, is stunned when Karnak explains that the power exactly matches his own. Karnak clarifies for Barrows that they had chosen to regress, not possess, and explains that the necromancer had left his living body to create new energy, meaning he is neither a body nor a soul. Barrows, puzzled, asks if Karnak's power has traveled to the past. Karnak agrees with this possibility. Barrows worries that this power might be enough to end the world and asks if Karnak can recall it. Seeing Karnak's response, Barrows is completely despondent. Karnak mentions that he will need to search for another dark energy source. Together, riding horses on a main road, Barrows feels noticeably more upbeat. He is relieved by the uneventful journey, free of thieves or mishaps. As they head to a new land, Barrows inquires if Karnak has any magical detection methods. Karnak replies no, and they will search in a traditional manner. They chat along the way before stopping in front of a village. Standing before the ancient building of the new land, both Karnak and Barrows think it would be an excellent place to gather information. They marvel at how beautiful the place is, considering it one of the most beautiful in the world. Karnak reflects on how he owes the people here a debt of gratitude, now seeking their help once again due to being pursued. Karnak tells Barrows that this time they won't need to resort to deceit. In a bustling grand hall, as they receive a large bag of gold coins, the clerk smiles brightly at Karnak and Barrows, treating them like wealthy patrons, respectfully asking what information they need about the apocalyptic darkness. After a brief conversation among the three, both Barrows and Karnak express frustration that the Lord seems indifferent while monsters overrun his territory. The clerk, still smiling commercially, tells them to look at the abundance of information they have gathered, as there has been a significant interest in information about the apocalyptic darkness recently. Slamming a pile of papers on the table, he suggests that Karnak and Barrows start with these. Both Karnak and Barrows are astonished, gaping at the massive pile of papers before them. After a moment, they begin to examine each sheet thoughtfully. The atmosphere turns bleak and disheartening as Barrows sighs regretfully upon realizing that the information available is grossly inaccurate. To their disbelief, the gathered documents only contain random cases falsely attributed to apocalyptic darkness. The clerk at the counter starts sweating nervously, aware that Barrows is not pleased with the information collected. He suggests filtering out the useless information, but Karnak, as if uninterested in such assistance, insists on taking all the documents. Karnak's magical aura spreads subtly, indicating to Barrows that he is using magic to communicate secretly. Barrows exhales a sigh of resignation, reflecting on Karnak's remark about how vital information is often hidden beneath chaos. Suddenly, a red-haired man looking frantic bursts into the scene, upset because no one believes he has seen a dark wizard. He rushes to the counter where Karnak and Barrows are, declaring to the head clerk his intent to report. The head clerk asks him to confirm the presence of a dark wizard in town. Out of breath, the red-haired man says he has informed the people at the temple, but they didn't believe him either, and he begins to recount his story. The red-haired man describes how a foreigner named Cleo arrived in town, took up residence in a derelict mansion, and quickly became popular with everyone. He almost cries, distressed by how his fiancée, like many other girls, was charmed by Cleo. An elderly blonde man, overhearing the story, expresses disbelief that the mere arrival of a handsome young man should be equated with dark magic. The counter clerk awkwardly laughs and dismissively refuses to file the red-haired man's report in his fit of anger. Stunned by the expensive fee for hiring a private detective offered by the clerk, the red-haired man storms out, warning that they would regret ignoring his warning. The people in the venue mockingly comment on how foolish he appears. Karnak sighs over the lack of significant information obtained that day, while Barrows seems less bothered, suggesting they try a well-recommended restaurant nearby. As they agree to go, Barrows casually asks Karnak if he suspects there is something sinister about this Cleo. Without hesitation, Karnak affirms his suspicion. Barrows' thoughts come together as he speculates that the target of Cleo's actions might be the knave country girls and that pursuing the souls of virgins is a type of dark magic. As they walk through the town, Karnak mentions he has something to show Barrows. Surprised, Barrows discovers it's a magical barrier crafted by a high-level sorcerer. Suddenly, they hear the call of a young priest from behind, which slightly surprises them. The priest introduces himself as Alias, an investigator under the authority of Hatoba. Karnak and Barrows introduce themselves as well and discuss their purpose in the new land. Alias, finding common ground, brightens up and seeks their help with the matter. He whispers about a sorcerer in town. Karnak and Barrows stiffen, simultaneously remarking that things can't be that bad, questioning how the Supreme Council knows and why Alias is here alone. Alias explains that he wouldn't act without evidence, hence his presence to gather information. Observing Barrows' authoritative demeanor, Alias notes that he must be strong. His eyes sparkling, Alias asks to join their group, promising to be useful on this journey. Karnak privately discusses with Barrows the need to check on Alias and jokes that they'll erase his memory if he turns out to be a sorcerer. Happily, under the guise of being children of the Lord, Karnak agrees to let Alias join. At the Grand Cathedral, Bishop Graz and Sister Julia appear cheerful as they discuss Cleo, assuring the trio that he is not a sorcerer. Alias politely responds, considering this not to be bad news. In a dimly lit mansion, a respectful servant bows to Cleo, informing him that someone has arrived to inquire about him. Cleo is slightly angered, not expecting that the mice would come to him. In the lounge, the three, Karnak, Barrows, and Alias, feel a headache brewing as the town seems to hold Cleo in higher regard than they expected. Carrack asks Alias if they should go directly to his castle for questioning. Alias denies this, suggesting they have a better plan that they need to follow. As darkness fell, Cleo quickly approached a nearby maid, making her nervous. She respectfully asked him where he was going. Cleo warmly replied that he needed to meet a guest and that she should rest first, making her seem utterly enchanted by him. After bidding Cleo goodbye, the maid responded with a wave. Once the maid was gone, Cleo smirked evilly, remarking how effective the spell was on frail humans. As he walked through the dark hallway, he thought about the 6 months he had spent summoning demons, but was irritated by an obstacle he encountered along the way. Looking over the mansion's protective railing, he thought about negotiating with the Carrack people and sending them away. Spotting something, Cleo calmly asked what they were doing there. Meanwhile, 3 Carrack men disguised as clumsy thieves were scavenging his property inside. Barrows scratched his head upon being discovered and asked Cleo if he owned the estate. He naively added that since Cleo was a good person, he might give them something. Cleo smirked, holding his forehead in feigned dismay at the pointless concern, not expecting them to be mere thieves. Alias, his face covered, spoke sharply, criticizing Cleo for laughing. Carrack added that they would teach him a lesson. A vicious blue light shot from Cleo's hand, dismissing the 3 Carrack men as the most useless trash. However, a defensive spell from Carrack made Cleo freeze, revealing it was magic. The 3 Carrack men then threw off their masks, smiling broadly and joyously. Barrows said exactly what Cleo was thinking, and Alias was surprised he fell for the trap so quickly. Cleo clenched his teeth in rage, feeling careless and determined to eliminate the 3 Carrack men there. He shouted to awaken the hellish death spirits to attack the Carrack men. Alias loudly proclaimed he would stall the demons as Barrows and Carrack understood and moved forward, red glaring lights appearing on each corpse, causing them to fall. Cleo, witnessing the situation, thought it was too early for this but had no other choice. He pointed straight up and loudly summoned the hellish monster. A huge monster with a terrifying face descended, oozing murderous intent, and Cleo satisfiedly stated that the Carrack men would not be able to defeat this monster. Slamming his staff hard onto the ground, along with Alias's declaration to purify this evil demon, a strong golden light emerged. This agile beam of golden light quickly engulfed the entire room, leaving Cleo stunned once again as he stuttered, realizing it was a counterattack. Grinding his teeth in discomfort, he refused to accept such a defeat, even though he was immobilized. Alias stepped forward, declaring his knowledge of what magic Cleo would use. With eyes blazing, Cleo acknowledged their extraordinary nature. Emitting an even stronger murderous aura, he declared he no longer needed to hide, and his form shifted unbelievably into a large and hideous figure before their eyes. As Alias worried, caught off guard by the unexpected turn, he was too slow to react. Intending to speak to the others, Barrows and Carrack had already leaped towards Cleo. Barrows gleefully hacked at Cleo's form with his sword, while Carrack calmly executed a magic spear technique, piercing Cleo's chest. A loud crash followed, and Cleo's struggling body heavily fell to the floor. Alias, baffled by the events, could only acknowledge the perfect synergy between the 2 Carracks. Barrows asked Alias if they had killed him. Alias replied that he would handle it. A gentle blue light from Alias's staff solidified over the truly aged form of Cleo. Dark energy rose from his body, Alias exclaiming it was as he predicted. Cleo harbored the power of dark energy, and he needed to purify the corridor. But before he could finish, Alias was knocked out by Carrack. Looking at Barrows, he said it was their turn to start. Carrack speculated Alias seemed like a necromancer, appearing here to absorb dark energy. Holding a vial of dark energy, Carrack told Barrows about the possibility of Alias being a follower of Tezranic, seemingly regarded as a god of death. Barrows denied that, joking that he thought Carrack was the god of death, but then seriously added he had never heard that name before. Carrack, also unsure, shook his head, talking about Alias's purifying power as both a force of death and life. After a brief conversation, Carrack finally addressed the main issue, stating his priestly power could refine chaotic magic. Carrack felt it was worth assisting him in this experiment, and with this power, he would become a 4th circle mage. Barrows exclaimed and said that they would need to find a relic. Carrack frowned and mentioned that stealing it from a church would also work. The next morning, Alias, in great spirits, thanked the 2 Carracks for their help. The 2 Carracks also smiled, hiding the fact that they had deceived him. Carrack nodded, happy that everything went well, although those under the spell were still a bit confused. Alias reassured them that they would calm down soon. He asked where they would go next. Carrack replied that they would head to the city of Darath. They said their goodbyes and departed, with Alias watching the 2 Carracks on the road, suspecting something about their identities and thinking he needed to investigate. Screams of pain echoed from a small house on the outskirts of Darath. A command was shouted to lift someone, and the person in the water barrel struggled to breathe when he found air. Unable to endure the torture, he yelled that he was a summoner, ignored by Carrack and Barrows. He hoarsely screamed that he would reveal all about the dark power if Carrack wanted to know, but only received Carrack's cold indifference and a cruel order to submerge him again. Struggling under the cold water, Karak was pleased as nothing was better than that, as it made the dark energy flow out more from him. The suburbs fell silent with the nightfall. Karak stretched satisfyingly because he had accomplished much that day and Hatoba had prepared good goods for him. Barrows did not deny it either. He also found it interesting that they had caught many summoners and was surprised when Alias asked for support. Karak crossed his arms and replied that it was just their lack of help, and surely they had been suspicious and scrutinizing them after the incident in the town. Pausing a moment, Karak continued about the many families lost at the hands of summoners, so people would think they were hunter of summoners, which was not a bother at all, as Karak would again gather heaps of information for free. Barrows spoke about whether it was time to go back, but Karak said it was not time yet. Barrows sighed, thinking Karak would decide when to collect each target piece by piece. Karak shook his head and said he was just preventing the spread of the incident. Precisely, he was researching the conditions for these gates to appear. Barrows said it would take at least 3 months, with many huge events about to happen. Holding out a letter with a red seal, Karak was surprised to see that the Hatoba group had contacted them. Reading the letter, Karak announced that Alias wanted to meet them and would explain everything. At the Grand Hatoba Temple, Alias cheerfully stepped out to welcome the two Karaks upon their reunion. He introduced the two individuals before them sequentially as Serathi and Relthane to the group of Karaks and vice versa. The man with blue hair introduced himself as Relthane, a sixth circle mage, and the red-haired woman happily said her name was Serathi from the Adventurers Association. Karak and Barrows looked at each other, having heard of Serathi's fame, and assessed Relthane as a high-level mage due to his circle rank. Karak was also a great mage, but unfortunately lacked the mana to awaken. He quietly asked Barrows if he had never learned martial skills. Barrows, slightly annoyed, countered that he could also fight on par with the fourth-generation martial king. Karak looked at Relthane and Serathi before him, politely saying he had heard much about them. Serathi modestly responded that it wasn't such an honor, and noted how careful Karak had been to have caught many summoners in a short time. Suddenly, Alias spoke up to explain, since everyone had been introduced. Sitting at the table, Alias' expression turned serious as he informed them that recently their council had been involved in a problem in the city, and trouble had arisen since then. The cities of Triss and the kingdom of Ust-Til and Tarlum had always had territorial disputes. Tired of the quarrels, they had married off a member of each royal family to achieve neutrality among the nations. However, problems arose, causing a lack of governing system and a criminal organization to control. Consequently, Triss had become ruins due to ongoing crime, leading to the establishment of the two largest criminal organizations in the area, competing for dominance. Ranfelt and Plath fought a long battle, but the advantage leaned towards Plath when they possessed apocalyptic dark forces. But because they caused too much chaos, they were accused of using summoners, leading the council to act immediately upon confirmation, and of course, the battle ended with Plath's victory. Karak nodded in understanding that everything had been resolved. But the issue Alias wanted to discuss was that Ranfelt was also accused of using summoners, but had hidden it well. Serathi stood up, saying the council must not know about this. Alias confirmed it. Barrows sat listening, feeling that this matter was unforgivable. Karak slammed his fist on the table, visibly upset, which startled Barrows and made him think Karak had no shame. Barrows said that because the reputation of Hatoba was at risk, they had to act discreetly. Alias nodded at that, cautioning everyone that making a mistake could cause trouble, so they should disguise themselves before entering the city to avoid suspicion. He was asked why he didn't let the council members handle the issue. Alias admitted it was embarrassing, but they were dealing with a leak from the council. The group they had sent to Ranfelt had disappeared without a trace, likely due to Bishop's staff. Alias had enough authority to take action, so he would report back after the mission. He emphasized the need to find definitive proof of the use of summoners. Serathi commented that it might be dangerous, as it seemed the whole city was against them. Alias nodded, saying that was exactly why he had called them, and he trusted that they could handle it. In a basement beneath the Ranfelt mansion, bodies lay scattered, unclear whether alive or dead, and cries of pain echoed. Two figures in long cloaks stood observing. One of them mentioned it had been a long time since they were sent by the council, asking the other if they thought it was an opportunity to continue acting. The other didn't respond, only sinisterly commenting as if interested in the sacrifices they received. A flash of blue light swept through the room, and the one who had spoken earlier continued, wondering if the old man could endure if he absorbed so much. The old man with blue eyes grimly smiled, replying that he could not. However, he pulled out a new source of energy from his chest, excitedly saying that was why he protected this body with the grace of the goddess. Deep down, he hoped more adventurers would be sent, then he would have more energy. Karak's group had arrived at the location under Alias's guidance. The city of Triss was in ruins, a terrible state. A sword suddenly lunged at Relthane, and as the gold fell from his pocket, children snatched it up and ran away in his anger. Relthane was complaining, wondering how they could possibly spend the night in such a place. Alias turned back to say he had a place. The four of them looked at Alias perplexedly, in front of the prospect of resting at Alias's Plath mansion. 4 members of the Karak sat at a table, listening to the head of the Path clan discuss the forbidden magic and did not deny their use of it. However, the fact that the Ranfelt clan continued to use it freely displeased her. Alias agreed, stating he could not just watch Trist act in such a manner. Eventually, Alias got to the main point, asking her for help. Sildra said she would try her best and inquired about Alias's plan, especially since Ranfelt had been on high alert recently. After pondering for a moment, Alias nodded as if understanding, then suddenly declared that he would ambush the Ranfelt mansion, shocking everyone present. Relthane questioned whether the plan was that simple. Alias confidently replied that it would indeed be effective. Sildra also felt Alias's plan was entirely feasible, since the forces at that location were not numerous, with their biggest obstacle being the lack of information from the soul summoners. Alias comforted Sildra, mentioning that the 4 remaining friends of his all had genuine skills in finding them. By nightfall, the Ranfelt mansion was tightly guarded and patrolled. 6 people, completely covered, prepared to act. Alias proclaimed that their action was for revenge, and they should begin. Together, they shouted that the Ranfelts were cowards, hurling homemade bombs over the wall. A large explosion and fire started to smolder, and the panicked soldiers screamed that they were under attack. They ordered each other to counterattack the intruders from where the projectiles had come, but they did not know that during the chaos, 5 intruders had already sneaked inside. Together, they entered the mansion, cautiously saying to be very careful. Alias sensed the foul smell of the soul summoners there. Unfortunately, they encountered the Ranfelt guard team right in front of them, accusing them of being sent by the Plath clan. Relthane conjured a circle of fire around himself, introduced himself as a skilled knight, and prepared to begin with a new greeting. A fireball shot from his mouth, a flame fiercer than before, charging directly at the guards who only had time to scream before being blasted in all directions. Confidently, he performed a chain lightning spell, trapping the remaining guards miserably in a net of chains, with the leader trembling uncertainly, not expecting him to cast so quickly. A blazing red sword aura emanated from Sarathi, slashing powerfully before his entire body landed on the ground, scattering the Ranfelt guards like falling leaves. The slashing and the piercing screams filled the air. Barrows, who had been standing still up to that point, suddenly spoke out, criticizing Sarathi's move as a mistake due to his disappointing movement technique. Karak disagreed, mocking him for not even being able to use sword aura. The guards, thinking they were unobserved, planned to attack Karak and Barrows from behind, shouting a death cry. Barrows turned around, stating he would start by warming up. A slash followed by a bright blue light emitted, choking the throats of the Ranfelt guards with their own screams. Karak also prepared for battle, his deep red power knocking down many guards even at a distance. Both Karak and Barrows were puzzled by Alias, who was swinging his sword around even though no one was nearby. Looking like a wild beast, he demanded their surrender, causing Karak to wonder when the priest had learned to wield a sword. Smugly, Alias declared that the Ranfelt family was just that easy to handle. Sarathi wondered why the soul summoners had not yet appeared. A voice asserted that perhaps they were waiting inside the mansion, as it would be more advantageous for them there. Entering the mansion, the silence was broken only by the sound of the door opening. Startled by a deep voice welcoming them, 3 figures stood in the shadows, their faces half covered like the Grim Reaper, noting their fame for their skills. However, the speaker's tone was disdainful, suggesting that no matter their strength, they were useless against the power of darkness. The faces of the 5 Karak members blossomed with joy, thinking they had finally found the evidence they needed. Sarathi asked if capturing them and returning would suffice. Elated, Alias confirmed that they had enough evidence. Karak and Barrows signaled that capturing them would make them rich. Their smug faces angered one of the figures, who challenged how long their laughter would last before commanding the dark shadows to drain their life force. With a whoosh, a dark light flew towards them, but Alias countered with a purification spell, casting a fierce blue light. The attackers panicked, realizing he was a priest. Before they could recover from their surprise, Sarathi swiftly licked his sharp blade, striking the enemy's garments and leaving them unable to retaliate. Alias intervened, reminding Sarathi that they needed to capture them alive. However, Sarathi denied doing anything. They observed something horrifying multiplying and clinging to the walls, covering the mansion and trapping them in a bizarre space. A smug laughter echoed again. Something like a demon or perhaps a ghost seemed quite thrilled at the prospect of absorbing a substantial amount of energy. Alias recognized the voice, and when he called out the name, there was no more doubt. It was Bishop Straff of the Tris Parish. Straff inquired if Alias had suspected him from the beginning, which led them here. Alias denied this, still in disbelief. Sarathi and Relthane reported that the exit was blocked and they had no means to open it. Alias understood the situation, as their powers had been weakened by the dark forces, rendering their holy powers ineffective. Karak realized that the holy energy was actually enhancing the soul's summoning powers. Straff, satisfied in his tone, asked Alias how it felt to truly confront a soul summoner. Alias clenched his teeth. Karak whispered to Barrows that it was time for them to act. Karnak thought this could be their grave if luck was not on their side. Without luck, this barrier, which contained both holy and dark powers, could be the end for Karnak and Barrows. Karnak had never encountered such a barrier and was powerless against it. Karnak could only use chaotic magic and soul summoning. Barrows was worried even Karnak didn't know this spell, so how could an ordinary bishop like Straff possibly manage it? The grating sound alerted the Karnak group that there was no escape left. Something was approaching, a swarm of golems created through soul summoning. The golems surrounded the Karnak group and began their attack. Alias stepped forward to protect everyone, calling on Hatoba for protection, but he couldn't hold them off for long. The Karnak group fell to the ground, and both the priest Alias and the high mage Relthane were captured by the golems, prepared to be locked in the basement with other sacrifices. Sarathi still had the strength to fight and swung his sword at the golems, but Sarathi's attacks were ineffective. The golem quickly captured Sarathi, and Straff ordered the capture of Sarathi, Alias, and Relthane, deeming the other two, Relthane and Barrows, as useless. As the golem tightened its grip around Sarathi, causing him pain, Barrows swung his sword and severed the arm of the golem, freeing Sarathi. Taking advantage of the golem's confusion, Barrows delivered a powerful stab into its body. Sarathi looked on in astonishment as the golem was destroyed, amazed that Barrows could defeat it without using any aura. Barrows explained to Sarathi that the weakness of the chaotic golems was in the areas where mana did not flow, which was hard to pinpoint as the mana flow continuously changed. Barrows thought to himself that of course he could do it, given his vast experience. Sarathi had to fend for himself, for if Barrows' energy were depleted, it would be the end for him too. Meanwhile, the situation for Karnak was not any better. The soul summoning techniques were ineffective. Even though Karnak tried to channel soul summoning power into the surrounding fog, he still couldn't control it. If things continued this way, the Karnak group would be defeated, and Karnak needed to find another way to counter continuously attacking the golems. It was clear there were soul summoning spells that Karnak didn't know about, suggesting the presence of something else. Karnak could only think of one thing that had to test his hypothesis. Karnak and Barrows kept launching attacks relentlessly. On the other side, Straff, infuriated, slammed his hand down on a table. He became enraged as Karnak and Barrows easily destroyed the chaotic golems. Straff should not have underestimated Karnak and Barrows. He should have absorbed all the sealed soul summoning spells in the Hatoba church. Golems alone were not enough. Straff had to try something else. Back with Karnak, a green soul emerged, diving towards Sarathi. Chased by the green soul, Sarathi had no choice but to swing his sword at it. But the attack not only failed to harm the enemy, it caused Sarathi's arms to suffer severe injuries as the soul struck back, quickly capturing Sarathi. Suddenly, signs of collapse began to appear around them. The barrier was breaking down. Straff, furious, confronted Karnak. Confidently, Karnak responded that he hadn't done much, just placed his own barrier over Straff's. Straff, being called an amateur, was shamed into anger and summoned the dead from hell to attack Karnak. As the barrier fell, Karnak realized that against this basic level of soul summoning, there wasn't much he could do. Karnak and Barrows had to deal with the summoned undead themselves, preparing for a battle. Barrows noted that the undead looked like high-level entities, not at all like the basic soul summoning that Karnak had mentioned earlier. It seemed that Straff's summoning abilities were stronger than Karnak and Barrows had anticipated. As the battle dragged on, it became increasingly clear that the longer it lasted, the more disadvantageous it was for Karnak and Barrows. They knew they needed to seize any opportunity to escape from there. Karnak unleashed a dark blade spell, striking a wide attack at the undead. Straff remarked that Karnak wasn't bad, but still useless against Straff's power. Straff summoned demons from Gienna, forming a pact with them to kill Karnak and Barrows and then bring Sarathi to him. However, the demons were confused and could not locate Karnak and Barrows as they didn't see them at all. Karnak mockingly laughed at Straff, remarking that he had never seen a summoner so easily fooled by illusions. Since Straff's barrier had collapsed, Karnak had created illusions and escaped the mansion. Realizing he had been deceived, Straff was furious. Meanwhile, Karnak and Barrows were safely positioned outside, Karnak taunting Straff as a fool, criticizing him for focusing solely on one type of spell, noting that a simple illusion was nothing special. Barrows, while wiping his sword, agreed and remarked that this allowed them enough time to escape. Barrows expressed concern about returning to the Plath family now, as it would be too dangerous with the Ramfelt family likely searching there first. Sarathi, having just regained consciousness, accused Karnak of deceiving her, Alias, and Relthane. Karnak inquired about Sarathi's condition, but Sarathi harshly told him not to pretend to care. Sarathi scolded Karnak for being a deceitful summoner and demanded to know where they were. Karnak and Barrows took Sarathi outside the city to avoid the barriers, explaining that Karnak needed time to heal Sarathi's injuries. Sarathi was suspicious, questioning why Karnak wanted to heal rather than harm her, suspecting that Karnak might be trying to do good. Sarathi believed that all Karnak needed to do was erase some of her memories, but she firmly refused this suggestion. Sarathi could no longer feel her hand and knew she would not be able to lead a normal life, let alone become a sword fighter. She wished that everyone would just kill her right there. Seeing Sarathi in such desperate pain, Barrows could not bear it and turned to Karnak, suggesting that they ask a skilled priest to use healing magic on Sarathi. However, Karnak said that using holy magic was against the laws of nature. Barrows mentioned finding a way to deal with soul summoning magic, which made Sarathi want to ask Karnak to use soul summoning to restore her arm. Karnak was capable of doing this, but he did not support the idea because using soul summoning would mean that Sarathi had to become his servant. As a necromancer who could control souls as slaves, Karnak knew that the contract of enslavement had led many adventurers to be captured and suffer cruel torture for the rest of their lives. Sarathi could not accept this, but looking at her hands, she was somewhat swayed. Karnak, seizing the moment, challenged Barrows' mind about using the soul summoning. With no other options, Barrows understood Sarathi's feelings and hoped he was not asking too much. Karnak, avoiding the topic with Barrows, turned to Sarathi and seeing her condition, genuinely did not know what to suggest. If she became Karnak's servant, Sarathi could regain her lost arm and the decision was hers to make. Sarathi wanted to know what would happen if she became Karnak's servant. Once the contract was signed, Karnak could see Sarathi's soul structure, and with that information, he could restore her body. Though Sarathi would still have her free will, there would be restrictions, and betraying Karnak would mean facing death. It sounded dangerous, but no different from the oaths of loyalty that knights endure. Losing freedom or the future of a sword fighter was her choice to make. After some thought, Sarathi chose to restore her arm. Before signing the contract, Karnak wanted to confirm her decision one last time. Sarathi was very sure about her decision, believing it to be better than never being able to wield a sword again. As such, Karnak began the contract, invoking his name as Karnak Jester, the Lord of Darkness, and asked Sarathi Allen if she was willing to become his servant. Sarathi agreed, and Karnak commanded her to open her mind and accept the slave contract. Karnak raised his hand over the top of Sarathi's head, and a beam of magic light shone. By doing this, Sarathi regained what she had lost. Although it caused her some pain, her arms quickly recovered to their original state. Sarathi, looking at her healed hands, happily called Karnak her master. Barrows congratulated Sarathi and began to inquire about how to rescue Alias and Relthane, who had been kidnapped. The soul summoning technique of Straff was stronger than Karnak had anticipated, so it would be better to use large-scale soul summoning instead of chaotic mana, as it would destroy the city. Therefore, Karnak proposed two options. First, to prepare and go rescue Alias and Relthane. Second, to abandon Alias and Relthane and flee. Barrows wondered, no matter which option they chose, Karnak's group would end up being seen as the bad guys, and being good was truly difficult. Sarathi advised Karnak to choose to save his friends, even if it meant resorting to violence. Even if violence was not the best method, Karnak could not abandon his friends regardless of the potential dangers. Sarathi was certain this was the right thing to do. Barrows said he understood Sarathi's point that if the motive was good, then even a cruel method could be acceptable. Both Karnak and Barrows were thrilled, showing a triumphant expression when using the soul summoning technique, which greatly worried Sarathi. The soldiers of the Ranfelt clan, sword in hand, went from house to house searching for Karnak's group, arresting all those not from this territory. Suddenly, two soldiers clashed, one swinging his sword at the other, but fortunately, he missed. The attacker thought the other wanted to fight, but the other explained that it wasn't so. His sword had moved on its own, and suddenly the person being attacked transformed into a monster, prompting the soldiers to swiftly attack. It turned out this was due to Karnak's soul summoning technique. Sarathi questioned why Karnak had to resort to such tactics. Karnak explained that he was creating an army of undead, which was the best option to fight against Straff, and fortunately, there was enough death energy in the city to use. However, there weren't enough bodies to control. If not enough, more had to be created, which, though somewhat cruel, was also to save friends. Karnak and Barrows looked at each other and laughed with satisfaction, and Sarathi thought to herself that this was somewhat unsightly. Although she hadn't said anything, Karnak might have abandoned Alias and Relthane. Furthermore, Sarathi felt that Karnak was not as cruel as rumored. He targeted only the members of the Ranfelt clan, sparing the townspeople. The ferocity with which the soldiers attacked each other was more than enough to level the playing field. Karnak cast his magic, beginning to control the dead soldiers on the ground, turning them into an undead army. Seeing this, Sarathi forgot her thoughts that Karnak was not overly brutal. Indeed, he was a demon. She started to worry about herself being a servant to Karnak. Karnak directed the undead army towards the Ranfelt clan, and although everything was going according to plan, Straff's soul summoning power was still stronger than Karnak had anticipated. Straff had summoned a death dragon and 7 horn-blowing soldiers, which were abilities that should have been unique to Karnak. Perhaps due to changes in the past, someone had obtained some of Karnak's artifacts. Karnak advised Barrows and Sarathi to leave, lest their activities be discovered soon. Sarathi was puzzled about being discovered, as the zombies were mostly illusions. Sarathi felt relieved to hear Karnak say this, thinking once more that Karnak was quite kind-hearted. Inside the castle, Straff stood within a magical circle, with Alias and Relthane lying in front of him. Straff could see what was happening outside the castle, dismissing the zombies as mere pets, regardless of their number. Straff was searching for Karnak's group when suddenly a voice echoed. It turned out Karnak had made it inside the basement, standing right behind Straff. Straff looked tired, evidently having lost much in the fight against the zombies. Sarathi noticed Alias and Relthane bound lying on an altar surrounded by flaming torches, an altar meant for sacrificing them to demons, though they had not yet been sacrificed. Straff was still boastful, and although he was indeed tired, it did not mean he could not handle Karnak. Straff vowed to make Karnak regret coming to the basement, commanding the zombie army that appeared behind him to attack Karnak's group. Karnak also used soul summoning techniques to fight back, and together with Barrows and Sarathi, they attacked the zombies, quickly bringing them down so swiftly that even Straff was taken aback. With no other options left, Straff resorted to his trump card, the demon Gienna. Gienna appeared once again, and Karnak silently assessed that Straff's power in necromancy might have reached its limit. Unyielding, Karnak cast spells on Gienna, employing summoning techniques against Gienna itself. Karnak told Gienna that it was time to end the fun and return, attempting to close Gienna's summoning gate. However, Gienna's power exceeded expectations, and it screamed in defiance, demanding to destroy everything, breaking Karnak's summoning spell. Gienna then urged Straff to express his wishes, seeing that Straff's summoning was effective. Straff quickly made a pact with Gienna, asking it to kill Karnak and Barrows and bring Sarathi back to him. Gienna immediately set out to fulfill Straff's desires, unleashing an immense power that overwhelmed Sarathi. Things were not going according to Karnak's plan, leaving them with no choice but to fight. Karnak signaled to Barrows and Sarathi to engage in battle. They quickly drew their swords and charged at Gienna. Despite their powerful strikes, the attacks had no effect. Gienna mocked Barrows and Sarathi, calling them pitiful insects, and swung its massive sword towards them. Barrows and Sarathi attempted to dodge but were knocked down by the powerful mana. In that moment, Karnak launched fireballs at Gienna, which it easily blocked. Gienna could utilize an aura nearly at the level of a Death Knight. If Barrows could awaken his combat aura, they wouldn't be struggling as they were. Suddenly, Karnak remembered something important. He spoke to Barrows about Plan P, which Sarathi knew nothing about. Quickly, Barrows knelt on the ground, and Karnak placed his hand on Barrows' head to perform a ritual. A blue light swiftly enveloped Barrows' body. Sarathi thought the ritual was abrupt, but Karnak had once mentioned to her that Barrows was not of flesh and blood. Turning back to Karnak, he commanded Barrows to open his mind and accept it as an order from his master. Barrows' eyes glowed bright blue, and Sarathi's eyes lit up as well, realizing that Plan P involved possession. Karnak had transferred Barrows' soul into Sarathi's body. It had been a long time since Barrows had inhabited another's body, and Sarathi remained conscious despite the possession. Karnak then referred to them as Sarah Barrows. Now inhabiting Sarathi's body, Barrows finally spoke up and asked for permission. He had mocked Barrows for not knowing how to use an aura and then possessing someone who could. However, he hadn't underestimated them. Barrows, now in control of Sarathi's body and her aura, swiftly swung his sword, striking Gienna with such force that it seriously wounded and shocked Gienna. Gienna could not have known that using another's combat aura was Barrows' specialty. Barrows targeted Gienna's vulnerabilities flawlessly, empowered by Sarathi's potential, which was now unleashed due to Barrows using her body. The sword, enveloped in a blue aura, turned Sarathi into a knight of the blue aura, all because Barrows was utilizing her physical form. Barrows praised Sarathi for her formidable latent power, which allowed him a greater ease in combat. He unleashed powerful sword strikes, each one hitting Gienna hard, pushing the demon toward defeat. Refusing to concede, Gienna counterattacked, but Barrows deftly dodged. Gienna then turned to attack Karnak, thinking that if Barrows were not merged with Sarathi, the battle would end. A massive explosion occurred, and Gienna chuckled triumphantly, thinking it had killed Karnak. But things didn't go as Gienna had hoped. Karnak mocked Straff and Gienna for being easily deceived and created numerous illusions of himself. Overwhelmed by the number of illusions, Gienna became confused about which one to attack. In that moment of distraction, Barrows leaped from behind Gienna and delivered a decisive blow. Gienna, drained and unable to escape the summoning, now lacked the mana to continue fighting. A human managed to overpower Gienna, a demon, which was an astonishing feat. A summoning portal appeared beneath Gienna, pulling the demon slowly back to its own world. Before departing, Gienna left a warning. Upon its return, it would seek revenge against Karnak, promising a fate of living death, a vow from hell. Karnak loudly challenged Gienna, questioning its attempt to flee after all that had transpired. Karnak refused to allow Gienna to escape. The demon from hell had planned to return and first seek revenge on Karnak. However, Karnak didn't give him that chance. While speaking, Karnak quickly acted, leaving the demon unable to respond as his mana began to reverse flow. After Karnak clenched his fist, the demon vanished. Simultaneously, the people he had absorbed reappeared, including Barrows and Miss Sarathi. Barrows happily thanked her for allowing him the use of her body. Karnak, filled with excitement, had one last individual to deal with, Straff. Before Karnak and his team could act, Straff sighed and surrendered. He promised to reveal everything he knew to the young master, wanting only to know what the latter was curious about. Karnak, misunderstanding a detail, simply planned to kill him and extract his soul for interrogation, deeming Straff's talk unnecessary. Karnak asked Sarathi if they should kill Straff, to which she decisively replied with a word, kill. Hearing this from Sarathi, Karnak decisively and swiftly executed the sentence, ending Straff's life. After this act, they extracted an orb from Straff's body, and seeing everything was settled, Barrows and the young master decided to leisurely return, with Barrows cheerfully suggesting they find a good restaurant to eat at. However, Sarathi stopped him as two of their friends and teammates were deliriously calling out. Barrows then remembered, nearly forgetting about the presence of the two. Soon after, the two fully regained consciousness, surprised to hear that Straff had been defeated by the trio, considering him not an easy foe to handle. Karnak immediately explained that after the two were attacked and fell into the basement, a horde of zombies suddenly attacked the mansion, indicating that another necromancer had risen amidst the chaos. Given Straff's nature, he would have tried to defend and retreat to the basement. Therefore, they took advantage of this, and with Miss Sapara's help, they killed him. Alias had nothing to do but bless Hatoba. He also suggested that Hatoba take the corpse to the altar for purification. Alias agreed immediately, and after the purification, he received an amount of apocalyptic dark energy from Straff tenfold compared to other necromancers. Barrows stood beside and curiously asked the young master if he had indeed extracted all the soul power, to which he replied that taking it all would be too obvious. With everything resolved and Straff defeated, the remaining issues were left for the church to handle. Everyone set off on their return journey. Sarathi also stated she would follow and serve the Count Jester, which was her choice. They returned to conduct a ceremony to formally recognize her service. In the Jester territory, everyone warmly welcomed the Count's return. The old butler noticed the beautiful girl following behind him, joyfully mistaking her for a potential new lady of the house. However, he introduced her as the new knight of the territory, Miss Sarathi. When the butler remained skeptical, Sarathi demonstrated her aura by splitting a towering tree in two, clearly showing she was an aura user. She was pleased to meet everyone. Over the next few weeks at the estate, no soldier could withstand her aura attacks. Truly, those who could use aura were remarkable. After a practice match with the knights ended, Barrows appeared and praised Sarathi, and he was next to duel with her. The two entered the battle. After several bouts, Barrows noticed that Sarathi's use of aura was quite peculiar, and she was gradually wasting aura with her strikes. He advised that she needed to properly manage her power with each attack. Pushed back by a technique from Barrows, Sarathi stopped and asked him if he could repeat that move, hoping to learn from it after a few tries. However, Barrows felt uneasy because using that technique more than 3 times could potentially collapse Sarathi's soul and drive her mad. Shocked by Barrows' words, Sarathi heard him say that she could become stronger without that move because she had the capability to do so. Sarathi had helped awaken Barrows' fighting spirit earlier in the afternoon, so they decided to stop there. Meanwhile, in the office, Karnak was incessantly pondering how Straff might have combined soul-stealing techniques with holy power, wondering if there was a skill that could achieve that. Unable to figure it out, Karnak decided to focus first on stopping the apocalyptic energy leaking out and spreading across the continent. He concluded that a powerful object capable of navigating space and time was needed to wash away the dark apocalyptic energy. This object, which could explore the fabric of space-time, had been created by him, the Dark Eye. Karnak casually wondered why a great warrior like Barrows had not yet awakened his aura. Barrows, somewhat melancholy, responded that it was a matter from the past, recalling when Karnak was still the Death King and had bestowed upon him the fighting aura. Sarathi sat stiffly in a corner, baffled by their conversation, filled with terms she was hearing for the first time. She gazed distantly at the carefree faces of Karnak and Barrows eating, not considering them ordinary people, yet she dared not think of them as world dominators. Reminding herself how she came to know such perplexing individuals, Sarathi leaned on her sword and asked Karnak why they needed to go to the Deventer territory despite having opened the Dark Eye. Karnak slowly replied that they would be arrested if caught using necromancy in their own country. Thinking of what Deventer had done to his family made Karnak feel like strangling him. Under the full moon, Karnak exclaimed that it was time. He raised his hand and a powerful dark red light swirled around it. Sarathi, curious, asked what Karnak intended to do with the eye. He replied that he wanted to send the eye through time to see if it could close the dark portal. In a flash, the eye was launched into the sky. Sarathi felt an unsettling quiet. Karnak explained that the quiet was because he hadn't opened a space-time portal, just looked into it. He then turned to Barrows and Sarathi, instructing them to be careful as he would enter a state of unconsciousness while venturing into space-time. Both nodded in affirmation. Closing his eyes to sense his surroundings, Karak followed the path of the dark eye, thinking to himself that it seemed very effective. Through the dark eye, he observed everything around him, surprised by the vast, endless landscape before him. Nearby was a tree with a bizarre, lifeless shape, which Karak quickly spotted and exclaimed joyfully, as if he had long been searching for it. He named the void tree Straff and murmured as if explaining that this was the true form of the power he wielded. He knew he shouldn't say it, but it was truly ugly. Suddenly, a dark red fruit fell from the tree. Karak hurriedly realized that the spread of dark magic was happening this way and needed to be stopped. Curious, he searched for the core of the tree. A deep purple light emanated from the center of the trunk, leading Karak to believe he could gather information from it. Suddenly, a roaring voice startled Karak, demanding he move aside. The voice persisted, questioning who Karak was, and declared itself as death, demise, darkness, and destruction. Instantly, a fearsome purple light shot towards Karak's dark eye. Karak recognized this as the power of apocalyptic darkness. Speaking slowly, the voice claimed to act in the name of Tezranic and commanded Karak to return. Karak was surprised as the name Tezranic emerged from the tree. A loud crash followed, shattering everything around. Barrow's worried voice called out, shaking Karak back to consciousness. Karak groaned in pain and, clutching his head, asked Barrows what had happened. Barrows, confused himself, only mentioned that Karak's body had been floating. Feeling powerless, Karak said they would discuss it later and asked Barrows the name of the god they worshipped. Sarathi, realizing what Karak was referring to, quickly said it was Tezranic, the god of death whom the dark cult revered. Karak nodded, exhaling as if relieved, and remarked that he had indeed been there. Barrows was taken aback by the reply. Karak seemed still unable to believe the reality, noting how dangerous it was that such a thing could exist. In a dark place, 3 figures cloaked in shadow stood under 3 spotlights. An old man among them announced that there was a problem with the sanctuary. Those present were members of the dark cult. The dark lord among them paused, surprised, as the sanctuary was supposedly inaccessible. The priestess of destruction was also taken aback and suggested that she would verify it herself. A servant girl entered, summoned by the bell of Elazar. Elazar wanted the servant to relay a message to Hudel that she wanted to meet him. In a dark room in a large house, Karak recounted the dangerous tale which he felt powerless to stop. He feared being exposed while attempting multiple approaches, all in vain. Karak's current dilemma was that he did not know which side the members of the dark cult worshipping Tezranic were on. He summarized that they were either exploiting the power emanating from a tree or disturbing the tree to draw random power. According to Karak, if it was the latter, then there truly was a problem. Sarathi didn't understand why that would be significant. Karak explained that disturbing the tree equated to disturbing space-time itself. Hearing this, Barrows and Sarathi grew fearful, understanding that if the cult could disturb the tree, it meant they possessed a power far beyond others, including themselves. Exasperated, Karak exclaimed, "Where did that damn name come from?" He looked at Barrows, who appeared as if he had, "I don't know," written across his face. Sarathi, curious about the possibility of a part of Karak's power having consciousness and becoming Tezranic, voiced her thoughts. Barrows criticized her for making nonsensical remarks, but Karak's affirmation that it could happen left him stunned. Barrows was confused, thinking Karak was speaking childishly. Karak clarified that he wasn't saying it was true, just that it was a possibility. The lack of information made Karak think they needed to investigate the dark cult first and probe its high-ranking officials. Given the difficulty in penetrating through current methods, Karak suggested a bold move: infiltrate the royal council to hunt down members of the dark cult. The 2 factions had been fiercely opposing each other for a long time, and joining the royal council required passing severe tests and an invitation. The problem was that Karak didn't know how to get in. Sarathi calmly stated that she could help if needed. They were surprised and thrilled to learn of Sarathi's extensive connections. After receiving a covert letter from Karak, the butler Tepal felt like crying as Karak left without a sound. Barrows asked if it was okay for Karak to leave like that. Karak was sure about it, explaining that if he didn't leave covertly, Tepal would have tried to stop them. Suddenly, a greeting was heard. The 3 turned their heads, their eyes lighting up as they looked at the person who had just arrived, the one they needed to see standing before them. Karnak, Barrows, and Sarathi were happily chatting and laughing. Although Alias had only just made contact, he appeared promptly. The story goes that the previous night, Karnak, Barrows, and Sarathi had discussed 2 organizations, the Royal Council and the 7 Saints Order. Karnak wondered if these 2 organizations were separate entities. Hearing this, Sarathi explained that a cleric was needed to capture a necromancer, so the church needed someone from the 7 Saints Order. With Alias's authority, he had the power to recommend them, but unfortunately, after handling Straff's matter, Barrows and Sarathi had returned to their territory. Alias had intended to propose the 3 to the kingdom, but didn't manage in time. Now that they had returned, they almost missed this opportunity. Alias handed Karnam an envelope. They could use it to gain entry to the assembly. Not sure if they could join, but Alias believed they were still capable enough to get in. Karnak, Barrows, and Sarathi happily thanked Alias and took the envelope before setting off on their journey. in the capital of a peaceful kingdom where the sky was clear and birds flew everywhere, named the Kingdom of Ustil Drunta, at the headquarters of the Royal Council, every warrior gathered back, each one very talented and strong. Karnark, Barrows, and Sarathi stood near the door and assessed the people before them. Soon after, someone from behind led them to meet the head of the council after verifying their introduction letters. Sir, Barrows and Sarathi followed, and the person who received them was Aaron Tell, the commander of the Royal Council, with a dignified appearance. He told the three that he had confirmed they met the conditions from the envelope and their identities would be kept confidential. Above all, their introduction by the otherworldly judge Alias was very trustworthy, but that still wasn't enough to qualify for entry into the Royal Council. He asked the three about the official law to enter the Royal Council. Sir mentioned that he heard about a training period required for new members. The commander then explained that this was to prevent heretics from infiltrating. Thus, he would assign them their first task. Karnark, Barrows, and Sarathi were shocked as they had just arrived and were already being sent on a mission. The commander cheerfully explained that their job was always to have tasks and to perform them. Afterward, the three went to meet the person who would guide them during their training period. He was named Tarman, a major of the 4th Battalion, the second son of the late thinker Alban, a 5th Circle mage. Following them was called a swordsman who had completed his training, and the last one was Alice, the ocean goddess Eretima, a second-tier heretical judge. After greeting each other, the 6 immediately began their main task. However, Barrows was surprised about Tarman being a major yet a mage, since it was unusual for a 5th Circle mage to have subordinates using aura. Tarman didn't pay much attention and explained that in their work, identity is also a part of capability, as it involves dealing with secular power. In a world where family power is more important than individual capability, working allows for learning, and the main job of the Royal Council is to gather intelligence on heretics, capture key figures, and conduct interrogations, not combat. Frankly, the work of the Royal Council is to do evil to the heretics. This is why mages capable of using a variety of abilities are more useful than aura users in these tasks. Most mages in the Royal Council are mages. Sarathi also wondered why clerics also had opportunities, and Alice explained that the rank of major could not be given to a priest. After addressing the queries, they proceeded to provide specific information about the current mission. The Royal Council had received information that a local noble had joined the Black God Society. The suspect was identified as Count Brelent in the southern part of the Ustil Empire. Therefore, they would have to disguise themselves as adventurers to infiltrate and investigate in the Brelent domain, gather incredible evidence before administering punishment in the name of the king. That was all the information provided, and everyone had to proceed with their tasks despite not knowing if the noble was indeed a heretic, surprising Sir. This understanding of the work made Sir, Barrows, and Sarathi realize why the Royal Council was so busy. A heavy rain poured down at Count Brelent's mansion. Inside, the Count's sun continuously worsening worried him immensely. Alongside him, a person in a mysterious cloak reminded the Count to make wise decisions considering his son's condition. Yet Count Brelent firmly opposed because he realized that necromancy only brought the dead back to life as walking corpses, which were of no use at all. The man continued to play on the father-son relationship to lead the Count astray for his own son. A father might do anything for his son, and ultimately he agreed to join Tisranic. At the same time, in an inn in Brelent, the 6 individuals had assembled and begun their mission. They split up to gather information from the locals. Tarman and Barrows disguised themselves as adventurers and entered Count Brelent's mansion. After inquiring about the situation with him, they gained insight into the conditions of the territory. Starting the information exchange, Cald began with details about Count Brelent, mentioning that Brelent had lost his wife early and his son was his only family. Karnak added that Brelent's son was suffering from a terminal illness, one that even holy healing arts could not cure. Tarman commented that this was a perfect scenario for zealots to exploit. Cald further noted another suspicious point. The crime rate had drastically dropped, with the Count leading the expulsion of many criminals. But if so, these criminals might have just moved to another town. Cald wanted to hear Alice's thoughts on similar matters she had heard on her way here. Alice mentioned a series of disappearances, a common occurrence when dealing with necromancers. Tarman's visit to the Count had revealed something interesting. Every window in the mansion was covered with very thick curtains, as if to block out sunlight, a familiar story, indicating that the Count's mansion might house a vampire. Inside Count Brelent's mansion, Brelent was sitting with his son, worried that his son would despise him, but Brelent's son denied it, saying this was the first time he felt so at ease in his life. Humans needed to kill and eat to survive. Brelent's son only needed to drink what he could by command and without harming anyone. The son's diet had changed much better than many dead. Brelent was glad his son felt this way. Brelent secretly thought his son remained unchanged, still polite and cautious. Brelent believed that the Black God Society was not a heretical group, but simply a new craft of the New Age where Tisranic had stepped onto this land, creating a paradise balancing life and death. Brelant's son could live a normal life again. Brelant knew his son might be uncomfortable, but Brelant's son needed to endure a little longer. Brelant would not let his son live in that body forever. Sarathi, walking tiredly beside Alice, already knew what Brelant's son was and felt there was no need for further investigation, but Alice reminded Sarathi to be more cautious until they found definite proof. A strange man approached Sarathi and Alice, informing them that Count Brelant had identified a wanted criminal and had sent the man to inform them. Sarathi and Alice were startled because Count Brelant had discovered a fake wanted criminal. The six regrouped at the dining table, and Turman expressed confusion about why Count Brelant would inform Sarathi and Alice about the hideout of a non-existent criminal. Alice nodded, saying the Count mentioned that the criminal returned to rest each evening and suggested that Alice's group ambushed there. Turman asserted confidently that it was definitely a trap. Kald agreed, noting how the Count specifically mentioned nighttime, surely indicating a vampire. Turman found it illogical that Brelant would think they would fall for such an obvious trap. Karnak commented that the situation was becoming more complicated. If Karnak's group ignored this information, the Zealots would know they were suspicious, leading the Zealots to dig deeper into information about them. Kald, Turman, and Alice agree, and Kald turned to Turman, asking about the strategy they should adopt, noting the situation was risky and the Zealots had likely created an advantage. Turman couldn't think of anything else but to go along with the Zealots' wishes. Karnak's group moved to the wooden house mentioned in Brelant's letter. Sarathi asked Turman about the strength of a vampire, to which Turman replied that a vampire is several times stronger than when they were human. Turman reassured Sarathi not to worry. Sarathi raised doubts about the strength of ancient vampires, and this time Kald responded, explaining that ancient vampires are usually detected quickly, and they typically can't live for long. Sarathi continued questioning about mana users or mages becoming vampires, pointing out that they can't use mana or magic anymore, making them weaker than before, as vampires need to relearn to work with dark mana. Seeing Sarathi's concern, Turman encouraged them, acknowledging that arrogance isn't good, but the Karnak root truly were among the best in the kingdom. While Turman was speaking, someone attacked the wooden house, resulting in a massive explosion. Fortunately, Alice quickly used magic to protect everyone. A group emerged from the smoke, and the leader recognized that Karnak's group were from the Royal Council, because no bounty hunter could have dodged that attack. Turman and Kald quickly realized the leader was Durald, the strongest knight of Count Brelant. Kald was shocked that someone who used aura had become a vampire. Turman was uncertain of the details, but it was clear that Count Brelant had conspired with heretics, wielding the authority given to the Royal Council. Turman declared that the Count's people were enemies of the state and the king, and they must kneel and accept the Royal Council's judgment. The group scoffed at Turman's words. If the vampires did not comply, Turman's only choice was to issue judgment. All six began to initiate their magic, advancing together to administer punishment in the name of the king. The enemy soldiers also charged forward to attack, and the battle intensified. A sword strike from Kald severely wounded one of them, nearly beyond recovery. Alice raised her staff, and a magical light emanated from it, proclaiming that corruption would burn before the light of the goddess. Alice's attack had a wide effect, causing the enemy soldiers to turn and attack her. Turman, standing nearby, wouldn't allow them to harm her unchecked. He summoned a golem from the ground and struck the soldiers with lightning, and turned to look at Karnak and Barrows. Turman had initially thought Karnak was just a fourth circle mage, and Barrows and Sarathi were ordinary knights, but their prowess surprised him. Such skilled individuals remained unknown until now. The outcome of this battle was not just about winning or losing. It depended on the battle between aura users, and even though both Sarathi and Durald were red knights, Sarathi, being less experienced, might not be able to defeat Durald. The battle grew fiercer. Durald, brimming with confidence, loudly proclaimed that although Sarathi might have a face younger than his years and decent skills, his abilities did not compare to Durald's. This declaration added tension to the already heated conflict, illustrating the challenges Sarathi faced against a seasoned opponent like Durald. The battle continued, with the soldiers loudly urging each other not to retreat. These soldiers, blessed by Tizranik, believed that even in death they would be resurrected. Karnak was impressed by how quickly some soldiers recovered, surprised that vampires could also utilize aura. If Durald intervened, Karnak's group would be in trouble. Barrows was particularly worried about Sarathi, who was fighting with Durald. Sarathi, with more experience and energy, however, couldn't find an opening to attack. Sarathi had thought becoming a vampire would strip him of his magic or aura and force him to develop dark magic. But these soldiers were able to use magic. Durald, arrogant with the power bestowed by the great Tezranik, could still use aura despite his fall. Sarathi communicated telepathically with Karnak, asking him and Barrows about the vampire's weaknesses, but had Barrows known them, the battle would have ended long ago. They were deemed too weak for Karnak to bother searching for their vulnerabilities, and he didn't remember much about vampires. Sarathi pleaded for Barrows' help, unable to resolve the situation alone, saying these aura-less beings were nothing. Barrows reminded Sarathi that he still had 2 opportunities to execute Plan P. Recalling his own zombie-like image, Sarathi panicked and realized he had no choice but to confront the issue himself. He would use his power to blow Durald away. Sarathi attacked Durald unexpectedly, who scoffed, a slight increase in strength making no difference. With Tizranic's power within him, Durald dodged Sarathi's strike and counterattacked. Sarathi couldn't overpower Durald with aura alone. Barrows reminded him that his aura application was still unstable. Sarathi used too much energy and needed to learn when and where to use his strength properly. Barrows reminded Sarathi of his training days to remember that feeling controlled his aura and focus. Recalling each training image, Sarathi concentrated his aura energy into his sword, making it sharper. Durald, unaware of Sarathi's plan, believed it would have no effect on him. As Durald charged, Sarathi struck powerfully with his sword, a blow Durald couldn't block. Seeing the effectiveness of his sword, Sarathi continued to attack Durald. He realized that this was how Barrows played with him. Although Sarathi was an aura user, he shouldn't target the sword or the body of the enemy. What he needed to do was to discern the enemy's intentions. Durald changed his direction of attack, but Sarathi could still block him. Sarathi anticipated where the attacker would move and aim at the target before Durald could act. Sarathi's sword strike caused Durald to bleed profusely. Karnak looked over and saw Sarathi holding the upper hand, seemingly without needing help from Karnak or Barrows. Sarathi had understood he was doing very well. Turman, Called, and Alice had also dealt with the soldiers, so things seemed to be going smoothly. Durald was bewildered by this situation, which had changed drastically in just a few minutes. Unable to believe it, Durald, empowered by new strength granted by Tizranic, decided he would kill Sarathi right there, even if it came at a cost. Desperate, Durald used a large amount of aura to attack Sarathi. Called was shocked to see Durald using so much aura, knowing it would affect his body. It seemed Durald placed a lot of trust in his recovery abilities. Turman told Sarathi to dodge quickly, but Sarathi knew he didn't need to avoid it. Even if he lost an arm, he could regenerate it to see who would win. The 2 extremely powerful strikes collided, causing a loud explosion that echoed throughout the forest, and a blinding light obstructed vision. When the dust settled, it was clear that Durald's head had fallen to the ground. Sarathi had stabbed Durald in the head, officially ending the battle. As dawn broke, Alice treated Sarathi's wounds. Sarathi thanked Alice, but Alice thanked him back. Without Sarathi, they couldn't have resolved the battle. With Sarathi's help, Turman had found evidence of the Count's crimes. Durald's head had been frozen to prevent it from dissolving in the sunlight. Turman asked Alice to contact headquarters to punish Count Brelent. Inside Count Brelent's castle, Turman, Alice, and Called arrived and eliminated the vampires inside the castle. Brelent in his room was not afraid. He only pleaded with Tizranic to spare his son, and then committed suicide. Outside the castle, Brelent's son fled with 2 attendants carrying hatred. Swearing in the name of the great Tizranic, Brelent's son vowed revenge.